Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, books, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you doing tonight?
Not too bad. Just keeping warm with this Arctic breeze that we've been experiencing here in Nova Scotia. How's everything going with you? Are you guys getting this Arctic blast too?
Oh, it's been cold for about a month now, so it's not changing. It's just pretty much cold every day. Earlier in the week, it was bitter, just brutal. Slightly better, but still cold. Now, does this explain why you're wearing gloves tonight? I noticed that.
It is. It's like it's really wonky cold, and I was looking at different news clips of the snow in Florida, so that made me extra cold. And I'm
wow.
It's snow in Florida. I don't think I've ever heard of that before. So.
Yeah, I guess northern part of Florida, that's a possibility. But yeah, that's pretty rare for most of the state. Yeah.
I would think so. And Louisiana, there's all kinds of places I just never thought would ever get snow. And it just makes me really frosty.
Yeah. Well, the fingerless gloves that you're wearing give kind of a Wolfman effect in a sense. And that is very appropriate for tonight, which, by the way, is our 75th episode. So this is a milestone.
Yes.
75 episodes of the Ghostly Gallery. And during the second half of the program, we will be talking about the new film Wolfman, released earlier, January of 2025. So we'll each offer our thoughts on that. We're also going to talk about a vintage horror film that came out 45 years ago. It was a film that was released early February of 1980. Very different from Wolfman, a film about a killer fog. And of course, it is The Fog, directed by John Carpenter. So those are the two movies that we're going to talk about on tonight's episode of the Ghostly Gallery. So no guest. We will essentially interview each other for the next hour or so. 75 episodes in the books. We are glad that we've made it this far, and we begin beeline toward 100 episodes, just 25 away. Very good. So as I said a moment ago, we are going to talk about the new film Wolfman, which was released not that long after Nosferatu. We'll get our thoughts on that. But let us first go way back to February 1st, 1980. That is the day when The Fog, directed by John Carpenter, entered American theaters for the first time. And this was part of a limited release. A week later, the film gained a nationwide release throughout the United States. Let's begin by talking about the storyline of the film, particularly for those who have either never seen it or maybe haven't seen it in a while. The Fog is set in the fictional California coastal town of Antonio Bay. It's about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. Also, it happens to be the centennial of a very strange and tragic shipwreck that becomes a very integral part of the story. Now, on the eve of the centennial, old Mr. Mackin, who's played by the great actor John Houseman, tells ghost stories to children around a campfire at night. One of the stories is about this ship mired in a deep fog that crashed against rocks on the Antonio Bay coastline. And this resulted in the drowning of all of the crew members. So a very tragic event. In the meantime, current events of a paranormal nature are swirling Antonio Bay. A trawling boat becomes surrounded by fog, and that causes the disappearance of 3 local fishermen. Now, 2 people will soon stumble upon this trawling boat, and they'll discover the body of one of the 3 fishermen. One of the people making the discovery in this town is a town resident named Nick Castle, and he is played by the terrific character actor Tom Atkins. Now, he has picked up a hitchhiker named Elizabeth, portrayed by Jamie Lee Curtis. So these 2 characters, Nick and Elizabeth, they take the fisherman's body to the local morgue, where Elizabeth will see the corpse come to life and it will try to attack her momentarily before it collapses again. And that's really where the fun begins in the film, fun in quotes, as the town will have to deal with a deadly fog and the cover that it provides for its ghostly and murderous inhabitants. So that is the basic story for this film, The Fog, from 1980. Now, here are some background notes on the movie, some things I think of some interest. First of all, The Fog is one of those movies that features a number of references to past horror films, including a mention of Bodega Bay, the site of the 1963 Hitchcock classic The Birds, one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Also, there is a character named Dr. Phibes, and that's a clear reference to the two abominable Dr. Phibes films starring Vincent Price. They came out, of course, earlier in the 1970s. There's also the Nick Castle character that I've already mentioned, and that's a reference to an actor who actually played in John Carpenter's Halloween, which came out just a couple of years before The Fog did. And I really love it when horror films make a point of referencing horror history, showing some respect toward it, and that's something that we see again and again. So kudos to John Carpenter for doing that. Another thing that Carpenter did here that I think is really nice, even though this movie is filmed on a small budget, he made a really smart decision to shoot the movie in widescreen Panavision. And that really gives it a more atmospheric and a grander look. And for a film that is set, in a coastline town, landscape is very important, and it really gives the film almost a majestic feel. So it's very beautifully photographed, and the widescreen Panavision contributes to that too. Another point of interest, Carpenter has said he was influenced to make this film after he and screenwriter Deborah Hill, she sadly passed away a number of years ago. She was a brilliant writer, worked often with Carpenter. Well, apparently the two of them, they visited England's famed Stonehenge back in 1976. They were actually doing a promotional tour for another movie. And while they were at Stonehenge, they both noticed this eerie fog making its way over the nearby landscape. And this really gave Carpenter an idea for doing a film based on a mysterious fog. And so 3 years later, Carpenter did begin production on The Fog. So those are just a few background notes on the movie. We've talked a little bit about the storyline. Tracy, let's get some of your initial thoughts on The Fog. I know you've seen this a couple of times. Your thoughts on it?
So I thought it was pretty interesting. I did not know that was the background on how John Carpenter came up with that story. That is fascinating. So, wow, that's kind of like something to definitely take note of. This movie, it gets better every time I see it, quite honestly. I saw it many years ago when I was a lot younger. And, I wasn't really fussy about it the first time that I saw it. I thought it was okay. It was a little on the slow side. And the effects just seemed to be a little bit choppy and outdated with the fog and the ghosts and that. But the older I get and the more times that I see it, I learned to really like this movie. I feel it's kind of nostalgic. It's plain, it's simple, but it's really, really effective with tension and suspense. And like, I'm a supernatural freak, so I really like that aspect of the storyline. Just the good old-fashioned ghost stories, right? And being from Nova Scotia, this kind of story really resonates with me anyway. It's just the culture that's here. We have our own ghost stories of like ships and lost crew. And, just the imagery in The Fog, that could be set anywhere here in Nova Scotia. But there's just something about the fog anyway, just like actual fog. It's super creepy. And everything sounds so different. It sounds so different. It's eerie, but it's beautiful in such a mysterious way. And I really liked this movie. I really quite enjoyed it. It's a lot of like visual aspects that I really like about this movie.
Yeah. Let me pick up on a couple of points you make there. I think you make a really strong point about appreciating this film as you get older. I think it's the kind of a film, if you see it when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, it's not fast-paced enough to maybe hold your attention at every moment.
Right.
But as an adult, you have more of an appreciation for things like atmosphere, suspense, tension. Then yeah, I think we do appreciate it more. And I think it does get better with each viewing. So I think that's very accurate. The other point that's interesting about a fog and how it can be frightening in real life, whenever it happens when you're driving and you're on a road and it's clear, and then all of a sudden you drive into that low-lying fog, and now your vision is cut short. You don't see as well. I don't, for example, see particularly well at night. I hate driving at night, even though it's necessary at times. Much prefer in the day. So you're driving in the daytime, or worse at night, fog comes down on you, really cuts down on your vision. And I've had situations in the past, I mean, not recently, but I remember years ago, where fog was so thick, I actually had to pull off the side of the road because I literally could not see more than 2 or 3 feet ahead of me. So when you're driving in a car, fog can really be disconcerting. I don't know if that's happened to you too, but definitely
absolutely.
Feel that. Yeah.
Oh, and it can be kind of scary too, because like you mentioned, you're driving and everything is great. And then you come up into this fog, you can't see, then you can feel kind of like the tension and a little bit of anxiety because like you don't know like what's on the other side of this fog because you can't see. So I can't imagine, like if this movie, like just being in that atmosphere, what it would have been like, right? Just the anxiety level, I think, is enough to put that extra creep factor in there.
And there's not much you can do. Turning on the high beams makes it worse. You have to keep it, the normal lower beams. So there's not much of an option other than if you can see where the side of the road is, pull off to the right and, assuming there's a shoulder there, you can park your car until the fog lifts. So that can be very, very concerning. And that's definitely an experience that I've had. It's worse at night, but not that great in the day either. So that can factor into this. And there is a scene early in the film with Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis when they're in the car and there is fog starting to descend on the town already at that point. Let's talk a little bit about how this film was greeted, Tracy, when it first came out way back in 1980. It came out in February, so middle of winter. And upon its release, it was really met with mixed reviews. There were a lot of critics that didn't like it. Some critics were okay with it. Didn't get a lot of rave reviews, but it did very well at the box office. And maybe part of that is because John Carpenter is coming off recent success with Halloween. But the film did extremely well. It was made on a budget of only $1.1 million, and it made $21 million. So it made a very good profit. Interestingly, the critical appreciation for this old school horror movie has really grown over time. It's become, I hesitate to call it a cult classic because it did do so well at the box office, but it is a cult classic in the sense that more people seem to like it now and praise it than the critics did way back in 1980. You talk about some of the best films John Carpenter has ever done, and I think The Fog is probably in the top 5 or 6 of all the John Carpenter films. In terms of general appreciation, it's certainly not as highly acclaimed as Halloween, the original, or perhaps even films like Escape from New York and The Thing, which in some ways are more exciting films, but still The Fog is pretty darn good. I think it's a case of it took The Fog some time to win over horror fans, because I think for some fans, the idea of a killer fog is less than frightening. Years ago, when I was at the Scaricon convention, I was getting ready to interview Joe Bob Briggs, great film critic, has his show on Shudder, He's done so many wonderful TV shows, longtime writer as well. And he had made a point about The Fog that a fog just isn't that scary. And he felt that hurt the movie. And I think a lot of horror fans, diehard horror fans, probably share that sentiment. A fog is not as tangible as a killer like Michael Myers or a shape-shifting alien creature like we saw in The Thing. It just doesn't have that same quality. Now, The Fog has also drawn criticism for being a bit on the slow side, which you mentioned earlier, and also for lacking blood and gore. Now, the point about the pace of the film, that's a legitimate criticism, a legitimate argument. However, the second point I don't agree with. A great horror film does not need blood and guts to be entertaining and appealing. Simply does not. I think some maybe younger generations of fans have taken that tact that they want to see kills and creative kills and violence. Mm-hmm. I'm not that type of person. I don't think you are either. I appreciate atmosphere and mood more than pure fright. And that's really where The Fog delivers. The coastal scenery and that thick fog contribute to a very creepy atmosphere throughout the movie. And most of the movie is filmed at night, so that adds to the effectiveness. And there's really an artistic quality to The Fog that has helped turn some of those early negative reviews into a sense of appreciation for the old school horror film that is heavy on suggestion and suspense. And it really is an old school film. It came out in 1980. It could very well have come out in 1970. It has a feel of a film, a horror film from many years earlier, even a film from the 1960s. Now, another one of the strengths of the movie is the cast. I mean, this is a terrific cast. We mentioned Tom Atkins, Jamie Lee Curtis. They're the couple at the beginning of the movie. Then you have Janet Leigh, who in real life, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. And this was the first time they were ever in a movie together. So that's kind of a cool thing. You have the great Adrienne Barbeau, who is at the radio station and is alone in most of her scenes, but handles that very well. Then you have venerable actors like Hal Holbrook, John Houseman, and there are some other, fairly brand name actors that appear. And really all of them play their parts very well. When you have a cast that is this deep with a good script that Carpenter and his staff provided them with, you really have the ingredients for a good film. So the cast, I think, is really important. Let's get your thoughts, Tracy, on what you think some of the strengths and maybe some of the other weaknesses besides the pace that exist with this film, The Fog.
Oh my gosh. So I don't even know where to start. Like the music, I thought was right on point with this film. It was eerie and it kind of reminded me of kind of like that running kind of music in the Halloween movie, kind of like in that manner, right? Just kind of like the very subtle, creepy music. So Pugsley Adams and I, we rewatched this movie last night. The cat was actually kind of like sitting here in front of the TV, and he thought the music was interesting as well. I will say that his ears perked up a lot, and it enhanced like the whole feel of the movie. I actually had to turn my light on because I was like, oh, I feel a little bit creeped out right now.
Yeah.
So I turned my light on, but I agree with you totally. I thought the cast was excellent. I really, really enjoyed Adrienne Barbeau's performance. Her voice was just so awesome and so calming. Tom Atkins was great. Jamie Lee Curtis was really great too. I was a little bit disappointed we didn't see a little bit more of her though. I thought she probably could have added a little bit more to the story, but all in all, like it was a huge cast. It was great. I don't think it had any weaknesses besides just maybe it might have been a little slow in spots. But it's a product of the times. And the special effects that they would have used for like the fog and the ghosts, it was as good as they could do at that point, right?
Yeah.
It did have kind of like, you're right, like a 70s feel to it.
Yeah.
It might have been a little bit more scary, I guess, if the ghost might have stayed on the screen a little bit longer. But the scenery was gorgeous. The lighthouse was really super creepy. It was a good vibe throughout the film. One of the freaky things that I'll just mention is when Adrian's character was going down to the lighthouse. It was so like I would be scared to walk that walk to the lighthouse. Yeah. And then, just having to even visualize her walking that same path back to her home after her evening show was over. Like, that would be so scary.
But, yeah, you're thinking about real life horrors. There could be some, horrible man waiting in the shadows. You never know, what could happen when you're walking in a remote location at night. That's right. You have a young woman here that really has no escort, no protection. So, yeah, it's a dangerous situation under normal circumstances. And then, of course, we have the paranormal that enters into it here. Another interesting thing about Adrienne Barbeau, she plays the character Stevie Wayne, who is the DJ working at the radio station. And I forget the name of the real life DJ, but she based the character on a real life disc jockey. I believe that was out in the Los Angeles area.
Really?
And I believe she was pretty popular back in the 60s and 70s. I don't remember her name, but in a lot of ways, the performance that Adrienne Barbeau came up with was based on this real life character, was drawn from that. And she certainly does a very good job. She was married, of course, to the director John Carpenter at the time. And that explains why she was in the film. But as with almost all of her horror films, she justifies it too with quality performances, even though she had the home field advantage of, knowing the director really well. Interesting point about Jamie Lee Curtis. I think in retrospect, we see what a big star Jamie Lee Curtis has become, one of the great scream queens of horror history the last 50 years. In retrospect, it'd be nice to see more of her in the movie. Might be nice to see more of Tom Atkins, who's a terrific character actor. But I guess there's only so much screen time to go around when you have so many good people that you want to put in front of the camera. So a few more thoughts on the film from my perspective, Tracy. I look at The Fog. I love the heavy atmosphere. I love the old school approach. It's a film with high levels of suspense, mystery. You're wondering, what exactly is this fog all about? Are these ghosts? Are these monsters? Are they a combination of the two things? You've got plenty of paranormal tension. And then, of course, this terrific cast we've been talking about, which is really like a who's who of horror going back 45 years. So it's no wonder The Fog has developed a very strong following over time. And it certainly does deserve that. Didn't get the critical praise when it came out in 1980. Now I think it's getting the due that it should be getting. I give it 3.5 stars for 1980's The Fog. So, Tracy, what is your rating? Our system is always 1 to 5 stars. Where do you rank this one?
So I thought it was great, and I give it a solid 3 stars today. But ask me again in another year, and I bet you that will probably increase, after I watch it again. So I really do like this movie, and I'm curious to ask you, have you seen the 2005 remake of The Fog?
I have not. And the reason I have not is it is universally panned. It's gotten so many negative reviews, even though it's got some pretty good actors and actresses in it, that I've never taken the time to watch it. I probably should, because sometimes I'll watch a film and come up with a very different perspective than the consensus of opinion. But I have not heard anybody say anything good about the Fog remake. And it just seems to be so bad. Nobody likes it. So I haven't devoted the 2 hours that's needed to watch it. I probably should, but I haven't till this point. Have you seen it?
I haven't. Yeah. And I actually didn't know they made a remake until I was just kind of like looking up a few things. And you're right. I didn't see anybody speak favorably about it. So I was curious if you had seen it. I might for the heck of it, if I get bored, just watch it and see what it's like. I guess the ending is a little bit different. So I'd be curious to see how they handle that. And it just kind of got me thinking about like some of the other movies, like, you know, the Stephen King's The Mist. And there was like a 2007 film called The Mist. And then there was a TV series of the same name that they actually shot in Nova Scotia, I believe. Really? They only did one season and then the show was canceled. But it just goes to show that, you know, there's just something mysterious about fog. And there's lots of creepiness to it. That's for sure.
You know, I've seen both the TV series and the film for The Mist. The TV series I didn't like. I'm not surprised that it only lasted one season. The movie was excellent. Yes. It was a terrific film, really well done. Didn't like the ending. It was a very dire, very down, very negative ending. But the film, for the most part, was really well done. There was a lot of tension. The special effects were very good. And it's a film that in some ways it takes the story of the fog, but then it concentrates it to the point where these people are trapped in a grocery store, kind of a, you know, an old A&P type store. They have nowhere to go and they're trapped by this mist and the creatures that are within it. And they're very violent, very bloody creatures. There's no way that seemingly anybody can survive if they go outside. So it's a very effective film. But again, the ending is a little bit of a downer.
Yeah.
But in terms of The Fog, we both like it. The 1980 original is certainly the one, seemingly the one that should be seen. We apologize to anybody who has seen the remake and likes it. You know, I like Maggie Grace, who's the star of the remake. I think she's done some great movies. She was in the Taken films with Liam Neeson. She played Liam Neeson's daughter. She was also in the Lost TV series. Very good young actress, but the remake of The Fog has gotten terrible reviews. The original from 1980, really an excellent film. Tracy gives it 3 stars. I go slightly higher at 3.5. So that's the first of the 2 films we'll break down on this week's edition of the Ghostly Gallery. We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll have a breakdown of the new film directed by Leigh Whannell, and that is the film known simply as Wolfman. Stay with us. We'll be right back, right here on the Ghostly Gallery podcast. Well, we are back on the Ghostly Gallery podcast. Bruce Markison and Tracy Asteria, my co-host and producer, both glad to be with you this evening. After talking about a vintage film from 45 years ago, we now will take a look at a new film that is still in theaters. The latest werewolf movie that has created some buzz, and that is the film called Wolfman. This one debuted in theaters mid-January. Some have called it a remake of the 1941 classic with Lon Chaney Jr. Really is not the case. I guess you could call it a reimagining of that film, but it's not truly a remake. This new film has absolutely no connection to the story of Lawrence Talbot in 19th century England. It does not feature any of the characters from the 1941 film or anyone who's even related to those characters. It's a completely different film in terms of characters, the storyline, and the conflict that takes place within it. It is a film that is set much more in modern day America as opposed to England. It starts out briefly in 1995, and then after that, it jumps ahead 30 years to 2025, and essentially current day America. So the film begins with a flashback. And it is set back 30 years in time, taking us back to 1995. In the remote mountains of the Great Northwest, specifically in Oregon, a hiker has disappeared and his fate is unknown. Don't know if he's just missing, deceased, what have you. In that same geographic region, a young boy named Blake Lavelle and his father Grady are seen in a remote farmhouse as they are getting ready to go hunting early in the morning. Now, the father is very stern, very strict, and he repeatedly warns young Blake about hunting, how it's very serious business. It's not just fun and games, potentially very dangerous. You have to follow strict rules. In a way, I mean, it seems like he's a little overly strict, but at the same time, he is showing concern for the safety of his young son, Blake. So the two go hunting deer in the Oregon forest. And while they're out on their deer hunt, they spot an unusual creature that is clearly not a deer or even a bear. It's not something that the father, Grady, is really sure what it is. So he becomes very concerned over both his safety and the safety of his young son. So Grady leads his son to a hunting blind, which is essentially kind of an elevated wooden structure that provides refuge against a potentially dangerous beast. So they're able to escape any kind of harm, but it is kind of traumatic. And the father especially wonders, what exactly have we encountered? It's clear to him, this is not a normal animal. This is some kind of almost an unknown creature. From that point, the story then moves ahead 30 years to the present day. So now Blake, fully grown adult, in his 40s at this point, I would think. He's living in San Francisco. He is married to Charlotte. She has a very successful but time-consuming job in the city of San Francisco. And the couple have one child, a daughter named Ginger. Now, it's pretty obvious their marriage is at least somewhat strained, in part because Blake has a bit of a temper, though he's not anywhere near as stern or as dictatorial as his father, Grady. He's got a softer touch to him. And it's obvious that, he loves the daughter, loves his wife very much. But, if things don't go according to his preference, he can get upset. So the temper is a concern. To add to their problems, his father, Grady, has gone missing from his remote house in the Oregon woods. He's been missing a while. And then one day at home, Blake receives a letter saying that his father has been declared legally dead, even though his father's body has never been found. But he's been missing long enough that the authorities say, we believe he's deceased. So Blake, in reaction to this, convinces Charlotte that the entire family, all three of them, should visit Grady's house, collect his belongings, his personal effects, and perhaps spend some time there on vacation, get away from the city, get away from, their regular jobs, the fast pace of the city, go to a country location, spend some time together. This is really part of Blake's plan to repair the marriage. On the surface, seems like a good plan, but as we're going to see, it's going to turn out to be a pretty bad decision in a lot of ways. So the family begins to make their way on these dirt roads to Grady's house, and they at one point get lost. They do receive some assistance from a friendly local man named Derek. He actually knew Grady, knows where the house is located, volunteers to provide them with an escort. They trust him. He seems like a good guy. So they follow him to the house. And as they draw closer, suddenly there's this presence of a large but somewhat still unknown creature right in the middle of the road. And it forces their cars off the road. And in the case of Blake and his family, they're in a large truck, a moving truck. And this thing, it kind of turns over. It hangs over a precipice. It looks like it's going to almost fall off the precipice and fall down, I guess, the side, not necessarily a mountain, but there is somewhat of an incline there. In the meantime, poor Derek is dragged away, presumably by whatever this creature is, and we really don't hear from him again. Now, Blake is able to get his wife and daughter to crawl to safety as they go on top of the truck, but he's on the driver's side, and he is in a position where he can't get out on the driver's side. He has to get out on the passenger side, but he's blocked because the creature is fast approaching, and he ends up being scratched very badly on his arm by this unknown beast. Now, eventually, Blake is able to get out of the cab of the truck. He, Charlotte, Ginger, they're able to walk to Grady's house, which is not too far away from where they've, run into this trouble. But after they arrive at Grady's house, Blake starts to become ill, apparently infected by this awful scratch. It's really worse than a scratch. I mean, it's really a bad wound on his arm. And this infection seems to lead to a gradual change in his physical condition, his body almost degrading by the hour. His teeth start to fall out. His complexion becomes ruddy, starts sprouting hair all over the place. Also, and this is just as disturbing, he is unable to speak normally, and he really can't hear normally. He's not able to understand exactly what Charlotte and Ginger are saying to him. It almost becomes warped as he's trying to hear what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, the situation intensifies and worsens and eventually leads to a major conflict within the family. So that's pretty much the storyline without giving away what happens during the second half of the film and ultimately what happens at the end of the film. So, Tracy, you had a chance to watch Wolfman as well. Let's get some of your initial thoughts on it.
So I did a little bit of reading about this too, and just because I was really curious about it. And from what I understand, this is like a third film in what's known as like the Dark Universe franchise, which brought us like the 2017 movie The Mummy and the 2020 version of The Invisible Man. Honestly, I was a little bit confused about the intent of this movie. Like you mentioned, people were referring to it as kind of like a continuation or whatever of the original Wolfman. But it definitely wasn't like that at all. It was more like of a standalone type film, I guess, in my opinion, with no connection at all. I didn't feel there was any connection except for like a werewolf-like creature. The trailer was unusual too. I watched the trailer before I watched the film, and it didn't really give too much of a real big hint as to what this movie was about, besides a man would eventually turn into a werewolf. And this is just terrible, but I wasn't really familiar with any of the talent in this film either. But I thought the beginning was really interesting, and it set the tone for kind of like what the relationship between the characters was all about. I thought the dynamic of the couple was a little bit off between Blake and his wife, and just not really well suited. Just because of her profession. I thought it was really odd that they would just automatically go and do a vacation out in the middle of basically the woods, with no questions asked, just pack up the family and just kind of go. So it was really strange, but I think that's kind of like my original thoughts for this film. It was a little bit confusing, I guess, at the very beginning.
Yeah, it really is a standalone film. It's a movie that we should look at not as part of the Wolfman canon, if you will. We should look at it like An American Werewolf in London.
Yes.
Or The Howling. Or what's the film that Gary Busey did in the 1980s with Corey Haim? That was another great werewolf movie.
Yeah, Teen Wolf. No,
not Teen Wolf.
J. Fox.
It'll come to me eventually.
Yeah. Silver Bullet.
Yeah, Silver Bullet, exactly. And those are three outstanding werewolf movies. Probably three of my favorite. Maybe my top three of all time. I could be forgetting one or two, but they're certainly among the top five. An American Werewolf in London, The Howling, Silver Bullet. None of those films have any connection to Lon Chaney, Lawrence Talbot, Great Britain. I mean, they're werewolf stories, but they're totally independent of what we saw from Universal Studios that came out in the 1940s and also some of the follow-up films, because Lon Chaney reprised that role 4 different times after the original Wolfman in 1941. So we really do need to look at this as a standalone film. The trailer is interesting too. When I saw the trailer, a trailer is supposed to entice you into really wanting to see the film. It's supposed to show at least 1 or 2 of critical moments, or at least moments before some sort of a major development. It's supposed to be visually appealing. It piques your curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think the trailer was very well done. It didn't provide a lot of insight. You saw the 3 characters, they were running around, but there wasn't enough there to pique your curiosity. Exactly. I was going to go see the movie anyway, because, Leigh Whannell is a fine director. He did a great job with The Invisible Man. He's done some excellent screenplays during his career. And I thought that this film was certainly worth seeing. And I have no regrets over seeing it. Glad to pay the $5 or $6, whatever we put down to see it, the matinee in Oneonta on a Saturday afternoon. So yeah, it's a fine effort in some ways, and I was glad to go see it. But I didn't go because of the trailer. The trailer did not draw me in. And I wonder if the fact that the trailer was subpar, maybe that played a factor. Maybe horror fans are going to see it, but maybe non-horror fans who might be enticed by a trailer, maybe they would see it if the trailer is really good. And it did not deliver. And the film itself, we're going to talk more about what we think of it in terms of its quality. It's not a spectacular film. It's not a majestic film like Nosferatu, which we talked about a few weeks ago. But in some ways, I think it's a very good, very solid film. But it's just not one that was maybe promoted in the proper way. Also, Tracy, it makes you wonder, why in the world did they release this in January? January is the dumping ground for horror films that studios don't think are good. Films that they feel are going to be disappointing. They're not going to turn a big crowd. So they don't come out with them in the summer. They don't come out with them in October leading up to Halloween. This is from a pretty big studio, Blumhouse. Leigh Whannell's a brand name director. I thought it was very strange that they decided, let's bring this out in January. And as it turned out, let's bring it out just a couple of weeks after Nosferatu. Not great planning there.
No, I don't feel it was great planning at all. And, I really do feel that it's something like these kind of movies, put them out in the fall. Give it a few weeks before Halloween. I don't think it should matter if the studio thinks it's lovely or if it might not do well. I say, you know what? Like, just release those types of films in the fall. Don't do it in January. People are just kind of like, what do they call January? Like Blue January or something like that. Like, it's not really a type of film that, moviegoers might want to go see, just getting off like the holiday season, right? Give it a little while, just give it a little bit and put it out. I don't know what kind of reception it's done at the box office. I didn't even think to look at that, but I would think it would do a lot better if it was more of a fall release rather than, January.
Yeah. You look back at the history of horror films that have been released in January, and there have been some good ones, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the best horror films do come out typically at other times of the year, whether it's in the summer or whether it's in the fall, specifically September and October leading up to Halloween. But if you look at the horror films that have been released in January, there's not a great track record there. Now, I don't want anybody to think that I'm trashing the film. I'm more trashing the promotional efforts, the trailer, that sort of thing. In some ways, I really like this movie. First of all, Wolfman is very nicely photographed. Some beautiful scenery, especially in the very beginning of the Great Northwest, the woods in Oregon, very beautifully done, great shots. The actors, although they're not necessarily huge names, I think all very capable. you have Christopher Abbott, who plays the lead role of Blake. Now, originally, this was supposed to be Ryan Gosling getting that role. For whatever reason, he decided to drop out, but still did become an executive producer for the film. Christopher Abbott is not a big name, but I think he's a very good actor. I've seen him in some other horror movies. I thought he was very good in the Bill Pullman TV series, The Sinner. He played a key character in the first season of that, did a very good job in that series. That was season 1. Then you have Julia Garner, who is absolutely terrific in Ozark, and I'm going to talk more about that later on. So she plays the wife, Charlotte. She's a very accomplished young actress. I think has a great career ahead of her. Then you have a little bit of an older actor, Sam Yeager, who plays Grady, the father of Blake. He's a very solid actor. And then you have the child actress, Matilda Firth, who does a nice job as Ginger. So they're all very capable. And I think they all work very well with the script that they are given. Now, in some ways, the script is limited. Maybe doesn't go into as much depth as we would like. Talk more about that later on. But with the material that they're given, I think they all do a fine job. Those really are the 4 key players. Also, in addition to being a beautifully shot film, Wolfman has a very good pace. The pace of the film is quite good, doesn't drag. There's plenty of conflict, plenty of action, and it certainly builds to a crescendo over the final 20, 25 minutes. Also, director Leigh Whannell, I think, deserves a little bit of credit here. He takes a very creative approach to this werewolf transformation that we see. In most films of this kind, we see the transformation take place on screen. And usually it takes place in a matter of seconds or in a matter of minutes. Go back to the 1941 film, The Wolfman, with Lon Chaney Jr. They did some groundbreaking special effects where they showed Lawrence Talbot becoming the Wolfman within probably 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And they used the technique of dissolve images. And it was groundbreaking. It was beautifully done. And it's something that has been imitated by a number of werewolf film directors since then. We don't see that, though, in this. In this case, Whannell makes the transformation very, very gradual. It's not happening over a matter of seconds or a matter of a minute or two. Mm-hmm. It's really happening in the imagination of the film over the course of several hours. We don't really see the changes taking place on screen. We don't see his face transforming before our very eyes. We don't see hair sprouting before our very eyes. Rather, we see Christopher Abbott in the role of Blake in one shot. Then we are shown some other scenes, shots of the other actors. Then we return and we see Abbott again. And this time he has physically changed from the previous shot. And this is done several times. So it's a much more gradual approach. I know some people didn't like it, but I think it's nice for a director to try something different. I think it's fairly effective. I think it works pretty well within the overall context of the film. So I like what Whannell did there. Rather than just give us the same old, Lon Chaney, David Naughton transitions that we've seen, and they've all been beautifully done. And I'm sure they could have done that again. Whannell decides, let's do something a little bit different. Let's also give the werewolf a bit of a different look. I give him some credit for that. I think it's worth giving that a try, trying to be creative, trying to be a little bit novel in approach. Also, Whannell, rather than give us a lot of gore, instead really focuses, I think, on the psychological aspects of the horror, the effects that it's having on the minds of the 3 main characters, the husband and wife, and of course, the daughter, Ginger. Blake, you can see, is trying to resist the urge to turn into a werewolf creature. He's trying to resist the urge to harm his family. Hard to do that. Maybe not too successful in the long run, but you can see he's kind of making that effort. In the meantime, his wife Charlotte, his daughter Ginger, they're caught in between. On the one hand, they want to help Blake. They want to help him fight back against these. They want to help him fight back against these violent urges. But at the same time, they know that they themselves may have to fight back against him. If it gets to a point where their lives are in danger, where his physical strength becomes very harmful to them, they know that they're going to have to take an extreme measure. And they're fighting between those two desires, wanting to help Blake and at the same time knowing they may have to defend themselves and they may have to do so in a very violent way. Now, I did say a moment ago that Whannell doesn't give us a lot of gore in the film. However, there are two physically graphic moments, and I'm sure, Tracy, you'll remember them. The first one is when Blake, this is kind of early on as he's going through the transformation, he's got this infected arm, the wound is getting worse, and then at one point, he just bites and chews on it vigorously. I mean, at one point, you think he's going to chew his arm off.
Yeah.
So that's kind of disturbing. And then another occurs later. His leg gets caught in a hunting trap that I believe Charlotte had set for him. And somehow he manages to pry himself off of this trap, but literally has to do so by chewing his leg off. So that's a pretty graphic scene as well. So for the people that like blood and gore, there is a little bit of that mixed in with some of the psychological horror. So those are some extra thoughts that I had on the film. Let's swing it back to you. Let's start to get a sense from you whether you like this film or maybe whether you didn't like it.
Yeah, well, those two scenes that you mentioned, man, they were pretty visceral, and they really were the only two kind of like gory scenes in this whole entire film. And throughout the duration of Blake's transformation into the werewolf, just like you mentioned, I was getting like little flashbacks of An American Werewolf in London. I just got those vibes, although we didn't see like that full on transformation. This one was pretty good. The fingernails popping off and, just the crunching of his body as he contorts a little bit. Yeah. I had flashbacks to when I was a kid when I watched American Werewolf, and it scared the bonkers right out of me. I was like, just, it was like those scenes, the fingernails in particular, and just the bones crunching. Flashbacks, bizarre. But anyway, it was really well done. Then you got the teeth and the jaw kind of like protruding. I think Leigh Whannell did great. He had actually done an interview that I read online, and he was talking about this transformation that he had done for the werewolf. And he had cited that The Fly from David Cronenberg was a huge influence because he really appreciated the way that it was done and just like the full-on body horror type feel. So, and I can see that. And, I empathized with Blake during that transformation. And like, I don't want to spoil like the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but you feel bad. I felt bad for him, very empathetic. You can see the disconnect that he has with his family as he's changing. And it's filmed not only through his family's perspective, but through his own perspective too. So I thought that was pretty cool because you saw it from two different viewpoints. And I was really impressed by that. I thought that was really, really well done, actually, just to get a good sense of how everybody was feeling.
I think that's a great point you make, Tracy. A lot of the werewolf films of the past delve into this feeling of sympathy for this monster, because this is a monster that becomes transformed without the choice. Yeah. They got bitten. They didn't want to become werewolves. They didn't want to react to the full moon in the way that they would react. We saw that with Lon Chaney when he played Lawrence Talbot. We certainly saw that with David Naughton in An American Werewolf in London. We've seen it in some other films too. We didn't see it in Silver Bullet because the character that becomes a werewolf in that film is really kind of a detestable character and is very evil and seems very aware of what he's doing when he's a werewolf. But a lot of the past Wolfman films and films like An American Werewolf in London, and also The Howling too, it's the reluctant werewolf. It's not like the vampire. The vampire knows that what it's doing is wrong, knows that it's killing people, knows that, it doesn't, it has a choice, I guess.
Yeah.
It could, I guess it could end its life. But it's fully conscious when the victims are in their grasp, and it's drawing blood and it's killing people, it's taking on victims. It's aware of all that. And in a lot of these werewolf type films, there is not that consciousness. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's been forced into a situation that really has absolutely no benefit. And I guess the only solution would be to take their own life, other than hoping for, some kind of a cure down the line. And you're right. This film does create that sympathetic figure. Christopher Abbott certainly conveys that. And I think the script, in a sense, forces him to convey that. And I think that part of it is really well done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. It was an interesting perspective for sure.
Now, as I look at this film in terms of an overview, it's not a great film. It's not a classic. It's not an epic. It certainly doesn't have the epic quality of something like Nosferatu, a film that we both love a great deal. It's a film that I think is hurt from being released at roughly the same time as Robert Eggers' masterpiece. With a runtime of about an hour and 40 minutes, I think it really could have benefited from an extra 10 to 15 minutes just to give us a deeper look into Blake and Charlotte, their troubled marriage, what exactly is causing the problems that they have. I think it also might have been interesting to have more of an exploration of the overly strict father. Why was he like that? We see it in the hunting scene, but that's really the only scene where we see the father Grady in his human form. I also think that Julia Garner as Charlotte, I think her character is too passive. I really would have loved to see some of the feistiness, some of the passion that she showed as Ruth Langmore in the TV series Ozark. I mean, for me, she was the best character in that series. And I'm not saying she has to come out and cursing, using the F word in every other sentence. I'm not saying she has to be like that. But she is a very passive, kind of genteel character in a lot of ways. I would have liked to have seen a little bit, just a smidgen of Ruth Langmore in her portrayal in this film. Maybe that's not fair of me to say that, but I mean, that's a role that she's known for. She's obviously very good at playing hot-tempered, foul-mouthed, highly strung characters. We don't see any of that. Not even an inch or two of it. And I think that's something that perhaps could have been done in this movie. Now, it's not often that we say that, a film should be longer. Sometimes we say a film should be shorter. I think in this case, though, it's an hour and 40 minutes. They could have gone an hour 50, hour 55, could have gotten it in under 2 hours, and perhaps developed the two main characters, Blake and Charlotte, a little bit better, and perhaps given us a little bit more depth on the father, Grady. Having said that, I still think Wolfman is a good, solid, entertaining film. It is nicely shot, it is well-paced, it is well-acted, and it features good makeup effects. By the way, no CGI, all the werewolf effects, practical effects, and I love the fact that Whannell did that in this movie. If I didn't watch Wolfman right after seeing Nosferatu, I'd probably look at it even more favorably than I do. But it is well done. It's entertaining. It's definitely worth seeing. And the fact that it passed muster with my wife, who actually went to the movies to watch me with it, which is the upset of the century. She is not a fan of horror. She speaks well of the film. And I guess that speaks well for the film, that it can draw some interest from non-horror fans too. So I think it's a good, solid movie. It's not spectacular. It's not great. But I think it's a film that even if you don't see it in theater, it's worth a couple of hours watching it on whatever streaming service it'll eventually be seen on. Mm-hmm. I like it. 3 stars for 2025's Wolfman. What do you think, Tracy?
Oh my goodness. First of all, I am so happy that Sue went with you. Did she rate this movie for you? I'm curious. Did she give you a star rating?
No, she just said she liked it. She thought it was good. You know, she doesn't like too much gore. She doesn't like a film that's too intense. And I don't think this film is overly intense. I think it's a film that non-horror fans who are a little bit on the squeamish side, they can probably deal with it, except for the biting of the arm and the biting off of the leg. Except for those 2 parts, I think this is a film that non-horror fans can swallow pretty easily. But I think there's also enough in it in terms of frights and tension and suspense that it's going to appeal to fans of the genre too. But yeah, she didn't give it a rating. I'll have to ask her for that later on. But she did like the movie, and more importantly, she paid for both our tickets. And that's really important as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm very impressed. So I liked it. I thought it was beautifully shot. And it was actually filmed in New Zealand. I did not know that. Wow. That really surprised me. The scenery was gorgeous. And you were talking about the character of Charlotte. So I didn't really get her character. Her reactions throughout this entire movie really kind of threw me a little bit. She appeared to take everything in stride, like it was a normal occurrence.
Yeah.
Like she wasn't freaked out. She wasn't like scared. She was just kind of like it was an average day. And I found it was a little bit weird and a little bit off-putting, just the way she was. I just didn't get why they made her like that, I guess. So to me, that was a little bit weird. I thought the pace was really good. There was a minimal backstory, not a lot of character development like we've talked about. But, you know, it kind of had a few moments at the very beginning. And then the movie just kind of like slammed it. It just kind of like hit the ground running. And at one point early on, I thought I might have missed a piece of the story, because it just kind of like happens, like everything just started happening. It was really good. Overall, it's not a bad horror film. I think it's really great for young people who might want to get their feet wet in the horror genre. It might inspire a new generation to start exploring maybe some of the old classics. I'd give it a 3 as well, 3 stars. It could have been better. Yeah, it really could have been. It felt like the story was a little bit too rushed for me. There could have been more of a baseline established, I think. But yeah, 3 stars. It was really good effort. Standalone film, 0 connection to the Universal classic, obviously. Not even a little bit reimagined. It's brand spanking new, and it's like a new werewolf genre type of film. But I'd recommend people watch it. Like, it was really, really good. And you just never know. I mean, this Leigh Whannell, he's great at what he does. And, you know, his projects just keep getting better and better.
Yeah, I think you're on the money. 3 stars from you, 3 stars for me as well. And it is a film I would recommend seeing. Maybe you don't want to pay for it in the theater, although a matinee of a few dollars, not too bad. Maybe a nighttime viewing might be more than you want to pay. But at the very least, it's a film you should see when it becomes available on streaming services. And I think it's a pretty capable effort. It doesn't match what he did with The Invisible Man, which I thought was an absolute classic that Whannell delivered a few years back. But this is still very good. And a film, it's been receiving some mixed reviews. It's been getting some severe criticism, which I don't think is really all that justified. I think it's better than a lot of the negative reviews that we're seeing out there. It's a very solid, good movie, and one that I think is worthwhile and entertaining.
Oh.
All right, so we both go 3 stars for 2025's Wolfman, and then earlier tonight we looked back at the 1980 film The Fog, which I gave 3.5 stars. Tracy was slightly stingier at 3 stars, but favorable reviews as well. Well, Tracy, as always, thank you for joining me and taking part in the conversation. Appreciate it as always.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure. It's always so much fun looking at some of these movies, both old and new.
My thanks to Tracy Asteria. My thanks to all of our listeners and viewers as well. We do appreciate the fact that you have joined us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we hope to see you again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.